Welcome back to our study in the book of Proverbs. Thank y'all for taking the time for the last several weeks, many of you, to join us here at the church, or at least virtually at the church via our YouTube channel, or some of you may be listening to this on our podcast through Spotify or through iTunes. But either way, we're very glad to have you and thankful for your participation. Your continued participation in the church makes these things enjoyable for us, and to some degree even doable for us that we can do this. If you have someone that you think would benefit from these messages, from these teachings, any of our Bible study teachings or of our worship services, do us a favor and do them a favor if you would, and share them with them. You can find more information on the website at secondbaptistwaycross.com, and we'd love for you to check out the information and the media that is there as well. We're in our study on the book of Proverbs. Today we are in chapter 4, and today we're going to be looking at what I consider to be one of the primary themes of the book of Proverbs. In fact, I have kind of three primary themes that Proverbs tells or points to throughout the book. One of those is the availability of wisdom. We've seen this in the first three chapters, as Solomon declares many times that wisdom is in the streets, or wisdom is at the gate, and wisdom is calling out. So we see that there is an availability of wisdom. Secondly, one of the themes in the book of Proverbs is our need to seek wisdom. Not only is wisdom available, but we actually have to avail ourselves of the opportunity that it presents for us. And so you can see that when Solomon says, search for wisdom, find wisdom, hunt for wisdom, hold wisdom. So there is a need to seek out wisdom. But the third theme that I see through the book of Proverbs, and that we're going to look at tonight, is the responsibility of the individual. In fact, the book of Proverbs, to a large degree, can be summed up by making one statement, or one word, if you will. And that word is choices. The choices of the individual and how they shape our lives, or how they usually shape our lives, okay? And so today we're going to be looking at that. I'll never forget, and I read a book many years ago that really helped me with understanding this idea of choices and our individual responsibilities. And the book was called Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud. And he has an entire series that he and Dr. John Townsend have written together on that topic. And the idea is boundaries in marriage, boundaries in dating, boundaries in work relationships, and those sorts of things. And one of the points that I read in Dr. Cloud's book one time, and I probably had heard it before, but it just hit me like a ton of bricks, was Dr. Cloud said this: no one can make you angry. No one can mess up your day. Rather, we choose to allow the circumstances of our life to dictate our response. And in so doing, we choose anger. Or in the case of his topics on marriage, we choose to retaliate, we choose to hold back affection, or whatever the situation may be. And that's a reminder for me today, and that truth is extolled throughout the book of Proverbs, how the choices that we make impact the life that we live. And so we're in Proverbs chapter 4, and we're going to look at verses 11 through 27 today. The first 10 verses of this chapter are Solomon continually reminding his son. And remember, he would have been writing to those who would have been the future kings of Israel, or those who he believed to be the future kings of Israel. And so he speaks and he says, my son, listen, my son, pursue, my son, do. And so when he gets into this passage here in verses 11 through 13 that we're going to read, he has laid out some groundwork for this statement. And here's what he says: I am teaching you the way of wisdom. I am guiding you on straight paths. When you walk, your steps will not be hindered. When you run, you will not stumble. Hold on to instruction. Don't let go. Guard it, for it is your life. So as he tells his son that he needs to listen, he lays out a vision for him. And the vision he gives him is of a path. And he points to a couple of things that would make a path desirable for anyone to take, a young person, older person, somebody who's in pursuit of adventure, somebody who's in pursuit of ease or something to enjoy. And so this is what Solomon does. And the first thing he says about this pursuit of wisdom and what wisdom will give you is a straight path. The picture there is of something that is simple and clear. And I go back to my comment on Dr. Henry Cloud and his book on boundaries, and the reminder that he gave throughout that book as I was reading this. And I probably had been married 12 or 13 years at the first time I'd read his book on boundaries in marriage. And I was reminded of how much I could choose to act out the correct behavior in my marriage. Now, Christy and I have been married for 12 or 13 years. By all accounts, in our minds at least, we had a pretty good marriage. But it was reminding me of how many times I allowed pettiness in, how many times I allowed my frustrations in, and that I was not just simply choosing to do what is right. Well, this is the picture that Solomon gives to his son. He says, here, son, I'm teaching you the way of wisdom, and the way of wisdom is a straight path. In other words, there are simple things to do. And if you fast forward several thousand years to Jesus being on earth, Jesus summed it up by making this statement: love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And then he explained who your neighbor was, and it wasn't who we thought it was. So he talks about this straight path. And the vision of wisdom is this: the path to take. It's straight. Doesn't mean it's easy. It's straight. In other words, you know where you're going. And that's an important thing to think about. For example, let's go back to marriage, if in a marriage you want to love your spouse, well, loving your spouse is not just about the emotional feeling that you have when you are with your spouse, but loving your spouse is caring for your spouse. It is serving your spouse. It is doing for them. It is being compassionate. It's being empathetic. It's being all these things. That's a straight path. Jesus laid it out this way when he said, love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, he talks about how we wouldn't deny ourselves a cup of water, so we should therefore serve our neighbors cups of water. We wouldn't deny ourselves bread if we were hungry, so therefore we serve our neighbors bread. And he lays it out, and he says, hey, it's really, really simple. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it's simple. So it's the straight path. And because it's straight, and because you can see where you're going, you can choose to walk or run. Now, what you think about there, I think what Solomon is saying is this. You can choose at which speed you want to pursue after wisdom. Think about those relationships that you and I have, and think about this guiding on the straight path. It gives us this image here of understanding walking and running and the difference of the speed. And I was reminded of this, of how often our copy of God's Word, and the author points this out on page 39, how often our copy of God's Word lays idle, still, unused, until we have a point we want to prove. And then we go to God's Word and we try to scramble and find the right verse so we can hit somebody with it, tell them what to do. And Solomon is saying this, man, that's not where it's at. It's clear, it's ahead of you. He says, hold on to instruction. And you and I have to know the instruction to be able to hold on to it. And so we have to understand that the pursuit of wisdom is a clear path. And our responsibility begins to peek out. He says, guard it, for it is your life. In other words, the actual decisions that you make are what you are. And I want you to think about that for just a minute. We know that our wealth is not what we are. We know that our possessions are not what we are. But Solomon says this: the actual decisions of our life are what we are made of. So we see the vision of wisdom and the path to take. The second thing is this: we see what the path of the wicked looks like. It's not as good. In fact, it's kind of frightening. Look, if you will, at the remaining verses in verses 14 through 19. Keep off the path of the wicked. Don't proceed on the way of evil ones. Avoid it. Don't travel on it. Turn away from it and pass it by. For they can't sleep unless they have done what is evil. They are robbed of sleep unless they make someone stumble. They eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. The path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, shining brighter and brighter until noonday. But the way of the wicked is like the darkest gloom. They don't know what makes them stumble. Solomon lays out, and you can see if you have your books on page 40, he lays out 6 statements. Keep off, don't proceed, avoid it, don't travel on it, turn away from it, pass it by. I want you to think about something here as you think about those words. Why did he use 6 phrases that were essentially the same but had a slightly different meaning? Well, I think what Solomon was pointing to is this issue in life called time. For example, you may wake up in the morning and you may realize that the way of wisdom means that you not engage other people in some of their arguments that they want to pursue with you, whether it's at work, whether it's in your home, whether it's via social media, whatever it may be, whether it's getting on and watching television or whether it's getting on and watching YouTube video after YouTube video, you may realize that's not right for you. So the first thing you do is you keep off. Then he says, don't proceed. Well, what does that mean? Well, what that means is the opportunity has been presented before you. So let's say you decided at work that you were not going to engage your coworker in a continual argument that you all have had going on. So you arrive to work, you greet them, you go on about your business. A couple of hours go by and you cross paths with them. And when you cross paths with them, they make a comment. And it stirs you. And you have to do, as I said earlier, that Dr. Cloud pointed out, you have to choose what you're going to do. And Solomon says, don't proceed. The first thing he said is keep off. You stayed away from it. You didn't go sit by that person. You didn't engage them in conversation. But 2 hours later, they've crossed paths with you and they have engaged you. Now you have to decide, do you proceed? Solomon says, don't proceed. Don't get into it. Don't go the way of the wicked. And the idea is, what is the way of the wicked? The way of the wicked is self-serving. The way of the wicked is selfishness. The way of the wicked is always being right. The way of the wicked is getting what you want. The way of the wicked is having whatever it is you desire. Do you remember Satan's temptation to Eve and Adam? If you eat that, you will have what God is withholding from you. That's still the temptation. To get what we think is being held from us, to have what others have and we just can't possess. So he says this, these are these timestamps that are pointing out to us how often and how necessary it is that we must avoid this situation. And what is their pursuit? Their pursuit is the desire to promote self over anyone else. Look at how he pictures it. For they can't sleep unless they have done what is evil. They are robbed of sleep unless they make someone stumble. Now, if you're reading that verse, like I did, and you say, man, there's some awful people in the world. And then ask yourself this question, as I did, and it was convicting. When is the last time I was awake because I was angry? When is the last time that I was so determined to prove that I was right that I was willing to deny myself sleep? This is the type of person that Solomon's talking about. That the way of the wicked is this pursuit of selfishness, this pursuit of self-righteousness, this pursuit of anger, of correcting and fixing everyone to fit your pattern and your way of life. And he says it's not just that they stay awake to be violent, they also eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. In other words, they can't eat without thinking of making sure that everybody knows that they're the right one, that they have the most power, the most authority, the most ability, whatever it is. He's like, their pursuit is this self over anyone else. It is constant. And then he says pain and suffering. They eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. Pain and suffering are their lifeblood. I tell you, it's a condemnation to me to consider how many times I have been willing to trample on other people so that I can be right. Then he points it out in verse 18 through 19. He says, hey, there's a contrast. The way of the righteous is like this light of dawn. It's this growing light, this pursuit of doing what is right, this pursuit of love, this pursuit of compassion, this pursuit of service. And as you begin to do that, this light begins to rise up in front of you and you see clearly. But the way of the wicked is so dark that you don't even see what's causing you to stumble. And how much I have to ask myself, what is causing me to stumble? What opinions, what frustrations, what ideals do I have that I have to push to the point that it causes me to stumble? It's really, really convicting in the self-respective form. So what do we do about it? Where are we? Well, verses 20 through 27 lay it out for us, and they're very clear. My son, pay attention to my words and listen closely to my sayings. Don't lose sight of them. Keep them in your heart, for they are life to those who find them and health to one's body. Guard your heart above all else, for it is the source of life. Don't let your mouth speak dishonestly, and don't let your lips talk deviously. Let your eyes look forward. Fix your gaze straight ahead. Carefully consider the path for your feet, and all your ways will be established. Don't turn to the right or to the left. Keep your feet away from evil. How do you and I go about avoiding the path of the wicked and choosing the path that Solomon said is straight and clear and allows us to walk and run? Well, it's really succinctly put. Don't let your mouth speak dishonestly, and don't let your lips talk deviously. Let your eyes look forward and fix your gaze straight ahead. He points out, and he starts out by saying, you better guard your heart. And then he begins to give directions on how you guard your heart. You don't let yourself speak incorrectly. Fish stories, hunting stories, shopping stories, work stories. Whatever your story is, Solomon says you better guard yourself. It's going to get you in trouble. Your desire to be heard, your desire to be seen is going to get you in trouble. Your desire for people to be impressed is going to get you in trouble. He says you've got to understand this. And it's so clear as I look at it from this perspective of how often my troubles have originated from my desire to just take and just twist the circumstances just a little. Have you ever said, what I said may not be right, but they needed to hear it anyways? I've said that. That's part of what Solomon is condemning here. Have you ever said, well, maybe I didn't say it nicely, but they needed to hear it anyways? That's what Solomon is pointing to here. He is simply saying that when we use our mouth to control others or try to control circumstances, we head down the path of the wicked. It's an incredible, revealing statement. It's more than just lying. Lying is someone saying, did you take the trash out? And you saying, yes, I took the trash out, and the trash is still in the can. It's this, well, I didn't take the trash out because right when I was about to do it, the phone rang. And after the phone rang, I remembered that I had to go and turn off the sink water. And after I turned off the sink water, then the baby began to cry. While all of that may be true, what you're missing is that you had 15 minutes, or in this case, I had 15 minutes where I was sitting down doing nothing, and I could have easily taken the trash out. That's the devious speech that Solomon warns us of. It's very concerning because I find myself so easily slipping into that, trying to control the circumstances and the way other people perceive me. So how do we do this? Jesus taught that the words that come from our mouths reveal what's in our hearts. That the words that come out of my mouth and the words that come out of your mouth reveal what is happening within us. How do we do it? We keep our gaze straight on Christ. He says, let your eyes look forward, fix your gaze straight ahead, know where you're going. Folks, you and I are not pursuing some idealism. We are pursuing the very person of Jesus Christ. The one who came to the earth, loved, healed, forgave, gave his life for us. That's who we're pursuing. Keep our eyes steady on him. All right? Think through your choices. He says, carefully consider the path for your feet. Think about where you're going to be if you do what you're about to do. I know this. There are certain things in my life where I can waste a certain amount of time or spend a certain amount of time. So I know that if I begin to engage myself in them, that I'm committing myself to a certain amount of behavior over an extended period of time. Solomon's challenge to you and I is think about where you're headed. And then he says, don't turn to the right or to the left, and keep your feet from evil. The reminder there is of what I mentioned earlier, that the path of the wicked is always somewhere parallel to where we're at. It's real close. And it's real easy to lean over there and start stepping on it and start serving ourselves instead of serving the one who gave his life for us. You think about the book of Proverbs and you think about this reality, choices. Solomon says there's a path that's clear and straight and you can walk and run on it. It's so clear. Then there's one that causes you to stumble and you can't even see what's causing you to stumble. And at the crux of it is this decision on whether or not we are going to choose to guard our hearts and to pursue truthfulness in the way that we speak and in the things that we say and the things that we share and the way we consider other people, and how in our lives that will allow us to pursue after God's plan for us. God bless you. Check out the rest of our Bible studies from Miss Harriet and Miss Christy and those that are teaching, as well as Brother Derwin on Sunday mornings. Thank you. God bless you.